11, 11, 11. That's the 11th month, the 11th day, and the 11th hour of the ending of World War I. That was called Armistice Day at that time. But Armistice Day in the 1950s turned around and they changed it to Veterans Day, and it's been Veterans Day ever since. What does Veterans Day mean to you? You think about that for a little bit. My name is Jerry Cowsert, and I was in the United States Army in 1968 through 1970. I was drafted into the Army, which many of you don't know because they don't have a draft anymore. But at the time, you would sign up, and then they would draw your number out, and they said that you were time for you to go into the service, and you went. Does anybody know what drafted means? My time to go into the service was very interesting in that I had a very busy month of June of 1968. June 9th, I graduated from college. June 16th, a week later, I got married. June 21st, I got my draft notice. July 17th, I left for basic training. Basic training is pretty much what they're saying it is that they break you down there in order to build you up, both physically and mentally. It's kind of tough, but you can get through it, and I got through it okay. I had a little extra on it too because I was heavy, I was overweight, and they put me in a special squad. They call it the Fat Man Squad, and everybody else was finished with their training for the day. All the members of the Fat Man Squad had to go out and run, and they ran and ran and ran until they couldn't run anymore. It was really tough, but it did take off the weight, and it did get me in good shape. One of the things that they wanted me to go into is they wanted me to become an officer because I had a college education. So they would wake me up in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m. or so, and bring me up to the captain's office, and they would try to convince me into joining and to become an officer. And they did this for a week straight. And finally I told them, they said, if you don't do it, you're going to end up going to Vietnam. And I said, well, if I go to Vietnam as an infantryman, I don't want to be the first one over that hill. I want to be the one that's behind. And I'm not going to become an officer. I'm going to take my 2 years. If it's a year in Vietnam, I'll do so. But I'm not going to become an officer. And then they stopped doing that. The next thing that I did is I went to advanced training. Advanced training was in Fort Ord, California, and they trained me as an infantryman. So they were right. They said I would go into the infantry, and it was hard training, but I was in good condition because of basic training at the time. And I know one of the things that was difficult is since it was in Fort Ord, which is around Monterey, California, we would go out. They would take a truck out and bring us to our training classes, and then everybody would have to run back. And when you ran back, part of that run was on the beach. And can you imagine with combat boots and full gear and helmet and carrying your weapon and running in the sand, it was very, very difficult. So I had to figure out a way to get out of that. So I joined the battalion football team, and they would come out and pick up all the football players and bring them back into for practice and for games and so forth. So I got out of that run in the sand. I only did it a couple of times. And it was a flag football game, but it was a very physical flag football game. And I didn't care for all that too much, but I certainly didn't want to be running in the sand anymore either. What does Veterans Day mean? Veterans Day recognizes all of those who have served in the military, whether it be overseas or stateside. The recognition is for their patriotism, love of country, and willingness to sacrifice, even if it means their life. All of this is to protect the freedom of our country. When I was drafted, many citizens were against the war in Vietnam and would do anything they could to avoid serving. including leaving our country. Many went to Canada. I was not sure of the decision our country made with the war, but I was sure, if drafted, I would serve my country to the best of my ability. And that's what I feel that I did. When I got my Vietnam orders and got ready to leave for Vietnam, I was one day late in reporting because our car broke down. My wife and my car broke down, and I needed to get another car for her before I left. So I was one day late. So instead of going over with a group of infantrymen, I went over with a group of engineers, combat engineers. They're the ones that build the roads, and of course the enemy then blows them up again, and they build them again, and that's pretty much what they do in Vietnam. But because I got there late, I was with them, and when I got to Saigon, Vietnam, which is in the southern part of Vietnam, very, very hot down there, we got off the truck and they lined us all up and they asked who had a college degree, and I raised my hand, and they made me commander of the guard. And I was commander of the guard for about a week, and all I do is wake up the new guards, bring out the guards that served back to their beds again, and it was kind of a boring job, but I would play cards in between time with the sergeant, and I would sleep as well. So it was an easy job too. But they said that I had to go someplace. I couldn't do that the entire time I was Vietnam, so they asked me where I wanted to go. And I, of course, said home. And they said, no, I can't send you home. What's your next choice? I said, somewhere cool. It was so hot in Saigon. So they said, okay. They sent me to play Coup in Vietnam, which is the Central Highlands. And it is very cool there. It was in January, it got down into the 50s at night. And it was comfortable sleeping. And in the summer, it was still very hot and very humid. So that's where I went. When they lined us up again, we got off the truck there, and they said, who can type? I raised my hand again. I was fortunate. I learned how to type, and I did it because I was too cheap to pay somebody to type my papers my senior year of college. So I took a typing course just prior to going to my junior year, I believe I took it. And so they said, okay, and they made me a company clerk. I ended up, for about a month or so, I was a clerk, and then we got orders saying that they had lost a lot of soldiers down in a part of Vietnam called the Delta, and anybody with a job description, which I had of an infantryman, had to be sent down there. So I gave it to my first sergeant, and he went in and saw the captain, and after some discussion, they came back out and they promoted me to a specialist 4, and they changed my job description to a company clerk. And that's pretty much what I did the entire time that I was in Vietnam. And also the entire time that I was, after I went back to stateside, I was in Fort Eustis, Virginia for a period of time, and I did the same thing there. I was a company clerk there. The job category, they call it an MOS, which is a military occupational specialty. And there are so many different MOSs in the service, and it's the military is like a community. It's like a town or a city. Everybody has a job, and by everybody doing their job to the best of their ability, that's what makes things work. Teamwork is what makes it work. So there's infantrymen that are actually out there fighting, artillery that are also in fighting. There's cooks, there's lawyers, there's doctors, just like in a town. And all of them working as a team is what makes things work. Just like it's the same in a company in stateside. One thing that I just a little story I wanted to tell is that being a company clerk, I didn't really get to go anywhere. I just pretty much stayed in the office, and when I got there, it got kind of boring, and they asked for a volunteer to man the machine gun on the back of the commander's Jeep, and they had to go about 30 miles to another base camp. And I volunteered, and we started out down the road, and the company clerk asked me, the commander asked me to test the machine gun. And not knowing that much about it, not handling them that often when I was over there, especially off a Jeep, I turned the machine gun the wrong way, and instead of the shells flying off the side of the Jeep, they flew onto the company commander's neck, and he was not too happy with me. But that didn't really go any. It didn't go much further than that. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I was talking about the military occupational specialty. I was a company clerk, but my brother, who also got drafted like me, he worked in an operating room. He was an operating room technician, and he stayed stateside. He was in a hospital in Fort Polk, Louisiana, and he was just as important to the entire Army, just as I was as a company clerk, and just as your infantrymen are that are out in the jungle fighting the battle. One thing that they would do is that they would spray this chemical down on to kill the foliage, so that they didn't leave any place for the enemy to hide. And this chemical that they sprayed was called Agent Orange, and it did the job. It definitely killed off all the foliage, but it also was really bad for the soldiers that got this into their system. Some would get sick right away from it. Some would get sick a few years later, and some, like myself, it took me 40 years before I got sick from exposure to Agent Orange. I think what's the main thing that you have learned from my story? And my thought is that stay in school. Staying in school could have saved my life. College education could have saved my life. Learning how to type could have saved my life. So stay in school, do the very best you can. And if you decide they're not drafting anymore, so they don't force you to go at any time, but if you decide to go into the military, do the best you can in there too. It's a good job, and it's good for our country. Thank you very much.